Hi, this is John Young with the Disc Jockey News. Well, you've seen a couple of videos of me talking about tweeter replacement. Well, I'm going to be actually doing the tweeter replacement in the Yamaha DXR8 right here. This is a self-powered top, and I'm going to get my station set up here, and we're actually going to go through step by step of all the things we need to do to get the new tweeter in the DXR8 from Yamaha. Let's get started. So the first step, we've got our working surface, and it's a little bit taller table because, well, I don't like to hunch over tables. First thing I'm going to do is put a old towel down because access to the tweeter on the DXR8 is through the back. So I want to have a towel down so that way I'm not scratching the face of the speaker, the grill of the speaker, and I've got it in kind of a nice working height. Next, we have 10 screws around the perimeter. We'll be taking out the 10 screws. Phillips screw heads on those 10. The 10 screws are removed, and now we need to get this, of course, out. What I want to do is I want to lay it down, just because it'll be a little bit easier to let gravity help me out here and get it to move out just a little bit, so I can have access to the inside. Now that we're open, you can see that there are 2 and maybe 3, if you can see that bottom one. There's 3 clips that are holding the wires from the control element here in the back, of course, to the speakers in front. So we need to disconnect those. What you have is you've got the one going to the woofer, one to the tweeter, and the other one I believe is going to the LED, but when we get this apart we'll be able to check for sure. So there's the element that we just disconnected. We'll take a look inside. We've got the black and red, which are going to the woofer. We've got the blue and the yellow that are going to the tweeter. And way down in there, let me see if I can see, you'll see the little board. And the little board is the LED. So now it's time to take apart our tweeter. We'll notice that the yellow is going to the positive and the blue is the negative. We'll just remember that because that could be good information for later. So we're looking at the front of the new driver for the tweeter, and you can see that it'll actually have the screws coming in from the other component, the actual cone, and of course that's the back, the positive and negative. So what we need to do is remove those 4 screws and disconnect the wires so we can pull that out and get to work on it. So this is the driver for the tweeter, and it is on a mounting plate. That's what I was saying that needed to be bolted to the new one. So we have 4 more screws. And you also see that these have kind of a little, there we are, kind of a serrated lock nut on that. That was one of the big things that, talking to the tech from Yamaha, they mentioned, is that this is something that an average person who's handy with a screwdriver can do, but to make sure when you're putting it all back together, these are tight. Because if you don't have these things tight, there's a lot of vibration that happens with speakers. And if they aren't, you could end up doing more damage than it would be just to take it into a serviced place. Unfortunately, in my case, I don't have a service place close to me, and I needed to get these back up and running as soon as possible. So 4 more screws, and then we're ready to start putting it back together. One little tip. I'm not a huge fan of really wrenching on things like this with a Phillips head screwdriver. These are also set so you can use a square head, which, of course, when they're in, they're kind of locked in a little bit better. So that's what I'm going to use. I just started them with the Phillips and got them in most of the way, but I didn't really torque on them that much with the Phillips. But I can use the square head, and then it won't jump out and puncture, which would be really bad at this point in time. So just snug them up, and we're ready to put it back in. And now we put the 4 screws back in, holding that mounting plate. And once again, making sure that we snug those down. I'm not going to snug that first one down too terribly much until, I'm just going to get it in there, and until I get a second and a third and a fourth, and once I have them all started, then we'll go around and make sure they're all snugged down. One last thought. When you're doing the procedure of putting things back together like this and you're running in multiple screws holding something down, 4 here, make sure to visually inspect when you're all done. Go around, double check, make sure they're tight, but then visually inspect to make sure they're all flush. Obviously this one's not, I haven't done this one yet, but I've had times where the threading hasn't lined up properly, and that would have gone in, and that was as tight as it felt like that's as tight as it was to go in. So I ended up having to back it out and line the threads up. So that's one thing to be careful when you're doing these things. Make sure the threads are lining up and things are going in. The first little bit should go in easily, and then as it goes into these plastic boxes, the hole gets a little tighter and it should kind of clamp down on it. But visually inspect, make sure it's all back together, because you don't want to get to a show and have problems and then find out later that it was something that you didn't take the time to do right the first time. So visually inspect that. Okay, just finishing up, going around and giving them one last check to make sure they're all nice and snug. And 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now we need to connect our solderless connections one more time. Now from our earlier part, we remember that the blue was the negative and the yellow was the positive. So get those clamped on there, all the way in, nice and secure. Give it a little tug. They are looking great. We are set. Now we're going to lay it on the side and where's the other wire? We'll be connecting 3 wires, once again, to that back panel with all the brains in it. So let's get that set up. Now this might be the most difficult part of the whole process, but I wanted to show you this. If you take a look, each of those connections had a little clip that held it into place. So what a person will do is just line it up, slide them in, and that clip will catch. And now I can tug on it and it won't come out. And the reason I say this is probably the most difficult part is because one of them is so tiny, which is the LED one, and I'm just about there. And then one of them is kind of short. Oh, it's not too bad, I guess. I am right there. There we are. In, secure, all 3 of them are connected. It's time to put this, slide this back in carefully. Tip it back up. And we're back to our 10 screws, and we are done. So I'm going to put those 10 screws in. And once again, I'm going to start before snugging down. Get a few started around before I'd even think about snugging them down. That way they can get the back panel all aligned as it should be. And now I can start snugging them down. Just removing the tape so I knew which one I did first. That way they're both done. Tweeters replaced. They sound great. Really, really happy with that. That's how you replace a tweeter in a Yamaha DXR8. This is John Young.